A birthday party, two best friends, and a small southern town that would never be the same again. On the night of July 31st, 1999, two high school seniors, J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett, began what seemed like an ordinary journey, a short drive to a nearby town for J.B.'s birthday celebration. But little did anyone know that drive would be the last journey they would ever take. When the girls didn't come home that night, their families were frantic. Hours turned into a nightmare when their lifeless bodies were discovered in the trunk of their car. What happened in the quiet streets of Ozark, Alabama that night? Was it just a case of two girls lost in an unfamiliar place, or something far more chilling? Hello and welcome to True Crime Revealed, the podcast where we uncover the darkest mysteries, twisted tales, and cases that will leave you questioning everything. Today we're diving into a case with layers of intrigue, heartbreak, and shocking twists. Our story takes us to Ozark, Alabama, a quiet town near the Florida border. Known for its charm and community, Ozark was the last place anyone expected to hear about a brutal double homicide. But in the summer of 1999, that tranquility was shattered. And even decades later, the town hasn't forgotten. So let's rewind. Back to July 31st, 1999. Two best friends, J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett, set out for a birthday party. It should have been a night filled with fun, laughter, and teenage memories. But somewhere along the way, something went horribly, horribly wrong. What exactly happened that night? Well, stay with me, because this story is not as simple as it seems. To truly understand the heartbreak of this case, we need to start by getting to know J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett, two young women who were more than just victims of a crime. They were daughters, sisters, and friends. They had dreams, hopes, and lives full of promise. J.B. Hilton Green Beasley was born on July 31st, 1981, the same day she would later lose her life. J.B. was the kind of girl who lit up a room with her energy. Outgoing and talented, she poured her heart into everything she did. Whether it was cheerleading, playing piano, or spending time with her family, J.B. always gave her all. She was the second oldest of five sisters, and her close-knit family adored her. After her parents' separation, J.B. moved with her mother to Dothan, Alabama, where she grew up in a loving home with her stepfather and sisters. She was the type of person everyone gravitated toward, a leader, a friend, and someone who loved making memories with those around her. Then there was Tracy Jean Hollett. Born on March 3rd, 1982, Tracy had a quieter demeanor but a heart just as big. She was the responsible one, a protective older sister to her two younger brothers. After her father passed away when she was only 5, Tracy grew up helping her mother and stepfather raise the family. She was kind, selfless, and always put others first. Like J.B., Tracy excelled at school and was also a cheerleader. Although they had different personalities, J.B. being the extroverted social butterfly and Tracy the thoughtful listener, the two girls complemented each other perfectly. Together they became inseparable best friends, a bond that only grew stronger over the years. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, a birthday party for J.B. Beasley. At around 10:05 p.m. on July 31st, 1999, J.B. and her best friend Tracy Hollett left their hometown of Dothan, Alabama, in J.B.'s black Mazda 929. Their plan was simple: drive to Headland, just a short distance north, and enjoy an evening with friends. But something went wrong almost immediately. The girls, unfamiliar with the back roads of Alabama, found themselves lost. At around 10:30 p.m., they stopped at a BP gas station near the intersection of Routes 173 and 431 in Headland. J.B. and Tracy used a payphone to call their friends for directions to the party. Witnesses reported seeing the girls here, seemingly calm but clearly unsure of their route. Instead of finding their way to the party, they ended up driving 24 miles northwest to Ozark, Alabama, a detour that made no sense. Why didn't they turn back toward Dothan? Were they simply too confused by the directions, or did something or someone lure them in another direction? At 11:30 p.m., the girls stopped again, this time at a convenience store called the Big Little Store. The store was closed, but Tracy used the payphone to call her mother, Carolyn. In that call, she admitted they were lost and told her mom they planned to head back home. As they stood near the payphone, a local woman, Marilyn Merritt, and her daughters pulled into the parking lot to grab a soda from the vending machine. Marilyn remembered the girls well. They were polite, well-dressed, and had a clean car. The kind of young women you wouldn't think twice about trusting. Marilyn gave them directions back to Dothan and watched as they drove off, turning right, just as she instructed. For all intents and purposes, the girls seemed to be heading home. But something happened after they left the Big Little store. Whatever it was, it sealed their fate. By 8 a.m. the next morning, Tracy's mother called the police, frantic that her daughter hadn't come home. Within hours, officers located JB's black Mazda 929 parked on Herring Avenue in Ozark. It wasn't hidden or abandoned in a remote area. It was parked in plain sight on a residential street. The scene was strange. The car, which had been freshly filled with bond, was almost empty. It was covered in mud, suggesting it had been driven through rough terrain. The driver's side window was partially rolled down, but the doors were locked. Police couldn't find any signs of forced entry. Inside the car, JB's driver's license was lying on the dashboard alongside both girls' purses, cash, and jewelry. Nothing was missing. This wasn't a robbery, but the keys to the car were nowhere to be found. For 6 long hours, the trunk of the car remained locked. Investigators had no idea what they would find inside, but eventually they realized they could open it using an interior latch. What they discovered sent shockwaves through the community. The lifeless bodies of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett were inside the trunk. Both girls were fully clothed, but their pants were soiled from the waist down, indicating extreme fear or trauma. They had each been shot once in the head, execution style. Tracy was shot in the temple, while J.B. had been struck in the right cheek. The shell casing from a 9mm bullet was found on Tracy's leg. Their clothing was muddy and scratched, suggesting a struggle before they were forced into the trunk. J.B.'s shoes, which she had purchased just days earlier, were caked in mud. Imagine the fear and pain these 2 young girls must have felt in their final moments. They were just 17 years old. One moment they were lost on a country road, calling for help. The next they were brutally murdered, their lives stolen before they even began. When the bodies of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett were discovered in the trunk of J.B.'s car, the police knew they were facing a brutal, cold-blooded crime. But what they didn't know was how the puzzle pieces of this case would refuse to fit together. From the very beginning, investigators were met with contradictory evidence, false leads, and a haunting lack of answers. This wasn't just a mystery, it was the beginning of a long, frustrating road toward justice. As is common in cases like this, investigators began by exploring the most obvious explanations. The first theory was robbery. 2 teenage girls stranded in a small town at night could easily have been seen as targets for theft. But this theory quickly fell apart. Inside JB's car, police found the girls' purses untouched, with their paycheck, jewelry, and credit cards still inside. Nothing of value had been taken. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. Then there was the question of sexual assault, a horrifyingly common motive in cases involving young women. But when the medical examiner's report came back, it showed no physical evidence that the girls had been sexually assaulted. No signs of struggle, no injuries suggesting such an act. For a brief moment, it seemed like this might rule out any sexual motive. But 2 months later, the investigation took an unexpected turn. A report from the state crime lab revealed traces of semen on JB's bra, panties, and skin. This discovery forced investigators to reconsider the entire crime. Was this clue the key to finding the killer, or would it only add to the growing list of mysteries? The car itself also raised unsettling questions. Why was it muddy? Why was the gas tank almost empty when it had been filled just hours earlier? And then there was the trunk, a locked vault hiding the horror inside. On its lid, police found a palm print. They believed this print might belong to the killer, but there was a problem. It didn't match anyone in the system, at least not yet. Weeks passed with no major breakthroughs. The small town of Ozark was on edge, and the police were under immense pressure to deliver answers. Then, on September 1st, 1999, exactly 1 month after the murders, 28-year-old Johnny William Barentine walked into the Ozark Police Department with a story that shocked investigators. Barentine was a longtime resident of the area and seemed to know something about the night JB and Tracy were killed. He told police he had been out late on July 31st, driving to buy milk for his young son. On his way, he claimed, he witnessed a black truck speeding near Herring Avenue, the very street where JB's car was found. At first, this seemed like a promising lead, but as police pressed for details, Barentine's story began to evolve in strange and troubling ways. Over the course of a 4-hour interrogation, he changed his account 6 times. By the end of the interview, Barentine claimed he had picked up a tattooed man on the night of the murders. According to Barentine, this man forced JB and Tracy into the trunk of their car before shooting them execution style. Barentine even described details of the crime scene that hadn't been made public, details that only someone who was there might know. Convinced they had their man, police arrested Johnny Barentine and charged him with 2 counts of capital murder. For a moment, it seemed like the case was solved, but almost immediately, cracks began to appear in Barentine's story. Barentine's account was riddled with inconsistencies. He couldn't keep his timeline straight, and his description of the tattooed man raised more questions than answers. But the most damning evidence came in the form of DNA. Tests showed that Barentine's genetic profile did not match the semen found on JB's body. It became clear that Barentine had fabricated his story. In court, he admitted to lying in hopes of claiming the reward money offered for information about the case. He revealed that he had felt pressured during the lengthy interrogation and had invented details to appease the police. On December 17, 1999, Barentine was released from jail after spending months behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. This was a devastating blow to the investigation. Not only had police wasted valuable time and resources, but the community began to lose faith in their ability to solve the case. The mishandling of Barentine's case led to harsh criticism of the Ozark Police Department. People wondered if the investigators had been too quick to latch onto a suspect, ignoring the glaring holes in their evidence. Even the families of JB and Tracy began to question whether justice would ever be served. With Barentine cleared, the case was back to square one. Investigators still had the palm print. They still had the unknown DNA, but they had no suspects, no witnesses, and no clear motive. The trail, it seemed, had gone cold. For the families of JB and Tracy, this wasn't just a setback. It was another layer of heartbreak. Their daughters had been taken from them in the most violent way imaginable, and now it seemed as though the killer might never be caught. But this case was far from over. In the years to come, new suspects would emerge, wild theories would surface, and one final twist would leave everyone speechless. After Johnny Barentine's release, the investigation into the murders of JB, Beasley, and Tracy Hollett stalled. Police were back at square one, and with no solid suspects or a clear motive, the case began to grow cold. But that didn't stop the rumors or the wild theories. One of the earliest leads came from grainy surveillance footage taken at the Big Little store, the last place JB and Tracy were seen alive. In the footage, a small white pickup truck was seen pulling up to the gas pumps around the same time the girls were using the payphone. The driver wasn't visible, and there was no record of a gas purchase at that time. This raised an unsettling question. Was the driver of the truck connected to the murders? Police released an image of the truck to the media, urging the public to come forward with information. But no one ever did. The truck and its driver seemingly vanished into thin air, leaving investigators with yet another dead end. Another potential suspect emerged in the form of a man from Michigan who had been visiting Ozark the night JB and Tracy were killed. Witnesses reported seeing him at a party near the area where JB's car was later found. Suspiciously, this man left town just days after the murders, raising red flags for investigators. When police tracked him down in Michigan, they discovered even more concerning details. He couldn't account for several hours of his time on the night of the murders, and he reportedly made disturbing statements to people who knew him. What exactly did he say? Authorities never revealed those specifics, but despite the suspicious circumstances, this lead too fell apart when his DNA didn't match the evidence found on JB's body. Months later, in March 2000, a local woman came forward with chilling new information. She claimed she had been driving near Highway 123 South on the night of July 31st, 1999, when she heard 2 distinct gunshots and a series of screams. Why did she wait so long to come forward? According to her, fear of getting involved had kept her silent. Based on her account, police searched the area thoroughly. During their search, they discovered a 9mm bullet lying on the ground, the same type used in the murders. But there was a catch. The bullet's brand didn't match the shell casing found on Tracy's leg. Without any forensic link to the murders, this lead ultimately went nowhere. Another promising suspect was a man from Mississippi who had been staying with relatives in Ozark at the time of the murders. Just 2 days after JB and Tracy were killed, he packed up and left town abruptly. When police tracked him down, they discovered he had an outstanding warrant for drug possession in Ozark. This gave them a reason to extradite him back to Alabama for questioning. For a moment, it seemed like the pieces might finally fall into place. But just like the other leads, this one fizzled out. Investigators found no significant evidence tying him to the murders, and he was released without charges. Lead after lead, suspect after suspect, each one ended the same way, with no answers and no justice. By the early 2000s, the case of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett had officially gone cold. For their families, the heartbreak was unbearable. They had lost their daughters in the most violent way imaginable, and now it seemed as though the killer might never be found. For nearly 2 decades, the case languished in silence. JB and Tracy became just another cold case, their names added to a growing list of unsolved crimes in small-town America. But even as the years passed, investigators refused to give up hope. They held on to the DNA evidence, believing that one day it might lead them to the truth. For over 15 years, the case of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett had gone cold. Their families were left without answers, and the town of Ozark quietly tried to move on. But in 2015, a bombshell allegation reignited the case, plunging it into controversy and sparking outrage across the community. In 2015, a sworn Ozark auxiliary police officer named Rena Crum came forward with a story that would shake the foundation of the investigation. According to Rena, the murders of JB and Tracy weren't random at all. She claimed they were part of a cover-up orchestrated by law enforcement. Rena alleged that on the night of July 31, 1999, an Ozark police officer had pulled over J.B. Beasley. The reason? He was demanding the location of cassette tapes that allegedly contained incriminating conversations about local officers' involvement in cocaine trafficking. When J.B. couldn't produce the tapes, the situation escalated. According to Rena, this officer was directly responsible for the murders of J.B. and Tracy, shooting them to silence them forever. She also accused other members of the Ozark Police Department of helping to cover up the crime by destroying evidence and suppressing leads. The accusations didn't stop there. Rena named 3 officers, Gary Butch Whittington, Rex Tipton, and Eddie Henderson, as well as former police chief Tony Spivey. She claimed that they had harassed her and even threatened her life to keep the truth buried. But what about those cassette tapes? What was so important that it might have led to the murder of 2 innocent teenagers? Rena's allegations suggested that these tapes contained evidence linking Ozark law enforcement to illegal drug operations. Adding fuel to the fire, journalist John B. Carroll published an article around the same time, alleging that the tapes were supposed to be entered as evidence in a court case scheduled for August 2, 1999, just 1 day after Jay and Tracy were murdered. If true, this theory paints a chilling picture. Were JB and Tracy killed because someone believed they had the tapes, or simply because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time? Rena's accusations caused a media firestorm, reigniting public interest in the case. True crime forums and social media exploded with theories. Some people were convinced this was the key to solving the case. Others were skeptical, pointing out that Rena provided no physical evidence to back up her claims. The officers named by Rena categorically denied any involvement in the murders or a cover-up. They filed a defamation lawsuit against her, journalist John B. Carroll, and another individual involved in spreading the allegations. By 2018, the case was dismissed in court with no conclusive evidence to support Rena's claims. Meanwhile, Rena herself faced legal trouble. In 2016, she was convicted of harassing J.B. Beasley's sister and was sentenced to a suspended sentence and a fine. The accusations left the town of Ozark divided. On one side were those who believed Rena's story, a conspiracy that had been hidden in plain sight for decades. On the other were those who saw her claims as a desperate attempt to stir controversy without proof. For J.B. and Tracy's families, it was another painful chapter in their quest for justice. The allegations didn't bring them any closer to finding the real killer. Instead, they added another layer of heartbreak and frustration. But even as the conspiracy theories swirled, investigators never stopped searching for answers. They still had the day evidence, and they still believed it could one day identify the killer. That day would finally come, but not before one last twist, one that no one saw coming. While conspiracy theories swirled and leads dried up, investigators held on to one critical piece of evidence: the DNA found on JB's body. In the early 2000s, this DNA hadn't yielded any matches, but by the late 2010s, advancements in technology offered a new opportunity to crack the case wide open. In 2018, a groundbreaking method of solving cold cases began gaining national attention. Using public genealogy databases, investigators could identify familial matches to unknown DNA profiles. This technique had already helped catch the infamous Golden State Killer and solve other decades-old crimes. By 2019, investigators in Ozark decided it was time to try this approach for JB and Tracy's case. The DNA evidence was sent to Parabon Nanolabs, a company specializing in genetic genealogy. Parabon's experts worked to trace the DNA to a family tree, eventually narrowing it down to one name: Coley McCraney. Coley McCraney was a name that shocked the investigators and the community alike. A local man with no prior criminal record, McCraney was an Air Force veteran and a well-respected member of the community. At the time of the murders, he was in his late 20s, married, and raising a family. On the surface, McCraney didn't fit the profile of a cold-blooded killer, but the DNA evidence didn't lie. The match was undeniable. It linked him directly to the semen found on JB's body, placing him at the scene of the crime. For investigators, this was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. On March 19, 2019, Coley McCraney was arrested during a routine traffic stop in Daleville, Alabama. He was charged with 2 counts of capital murder and 1 count of first-degree sexual assault. For the families of JB and Tracy, the news of his arrest brought a wave of emotions: relief that justice was finally within reach, but also the heartbreak of reliving the pain of that fateful night. The arrest of Coley McCraney sent shockwaves through Ozark. For years, people had speculated about who could commit such a horrific act. Now they were faced with the reality that the killer had been hiding in plain sight, living among them as an ordinary citizen. McCraney's arrest also sparked new questions. Why did he do it? Was it a random act of violence, or was there a deeper motive? And perhaps the most chilling question of all, could there be more victims? The arrest of Coley McCraney was a testament to the power of persistence and the advancements in forensic science. For 2 decades, JB and Tracy's families had held on to hope, and now that hope had finally paid off. But even as they prepared for the long road to trial, lingering questions remained. What exactly happened on the night of July 31st, 1999? Would McCraney reveal the truth, or would he take his secrets to the grave? Coley McCraney's trial was not just about convicting a man. It was about finding answers to a tragedy that had haunted families and a community for over 20 years. The trial began in April 2023, drawing intense media attention and reopening wounds that many had tried to heal. The case against McCraney rested heavily on the DNA evidence that linked him directly to the crime scene, but his defense raised complex questions that kept everyone on edge until the very end. The prosecution's case was clear and focused. They argued that the DNA evidence was irrefutable. The semen found on J.B. Beasley's body was a perfect match to Coley McCraney, a man who had denied ever meeting either J.B. or Tracy. Prosecutors described the crime as deliberate and calculated. 2 young girls lost in the wrong place at the wrong time, crossing paths with a man who decided to end their lives. The prosecution also highlighted McCraney's evasion of justice for 2 decades. Despite living in the area where the crime occurred, he had managed to avoid suspicion, leaving JB and Tracy's families to suffer in uncertainty. This, they argued, pointed to a calculated attempt to hide his involvement. But McCraney's defense team pushed back hard. They argued that while the DNA evidence proved contact, it didn't prove murder. They raised the possibility that McCraney's DNA could have been transferred to JB's body under circumstances unrelated to the crime. Without any witnesses placing McCraney at the scene or other physical evidence linking him to the murders, the defense claimed the prosecution's case relied too heavily on the DNA alone. The defense also emphasized McCraney's life and character. A military veteran with no prior criminal record, McCraney had lived quietly in the community for years. They suggested it was unlikely that a man with such a history would commit a brutal double murder and then return to a normal life without raising suspicion. The trial was emotionally charged with heartbreaking testimony from JB and Tracy's families. JB's mother, Cheryl, described her daughter's infectious energy and the devastation of losing her so suddenly. Tracy's mother, Carolyn, spoke about her daughter's selflessness and the unbearable pain of not being able to protect her. The courtroom also heard from investigators who had worked tirelessly on the case for decades. They recounted the early missteps, the frustration of dead ends, and the moment they finally made the DNA match that led to McCraney's arrest. Their testimony highlighted the painstaking effort it took to bring the case to trial, emphasizing how crucial the DNA evidence was to their investigation. When it was McCraney's turn to testify, he maintained his innocence. Calm and composed, he told the court that he had no knowledge of JB or Tracy and denied any involvement in their murders. When pressed about the DNA evidence, McCraney offered no explanation, instead doubling down on his claim that he had nothing to do with the crime. This lack of explanation was a turning point. While the defense tried to sow doubt about the DNA's significance, McCraney's refusal to address the evidence directly left many in the courtroom unconvinced. After weeks of testimony and hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. Coley McCraney was found guilty of the murders of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Hollett. For the families, it was a moment of both relief and sorrow, a step closer to justice, but one that could never bring back their daughters. McCraney was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would never again walk free. The verdict marked the end of a decades-long fight for answers, but it also left lingering questions. Why did McCraney commit this crime? Was it premeditated, or was it a chance encounter that spiraled into tragedy? And most haunting of all, could he have been involved in other crimes that have yet to be uncovered? For JB and Tracy's families, the verdict brought a sense of closure, but it didn't erase the pain of their loss. Speaking after the trial, Cheryl Beasley said, "Justice was served, but nothing will ever fill the hole in our hearts." Carolyn Hollett echoed those sentiments, expressing gratitude for the investigators and prosecutors who never gave up on their daughters. The trial also left a lasting impact on the community of Ozark. For years, this case had cast a shadow over the town, a grim reminder of the dangers that can lurk in even the most familiar places. McCraney's conviction allowed the town to begin healing, but it also left behind a chilling realization. For 20 years, a murderer had lived among them, undetected and unpunished. The trial of Coley McCraney was not just about seeking justice. It was about uncovering the truth behind a tragedy that had shattered two families and a community. While the DNA evidence provided the key to solving this case, it also raised questions that may never be fully answered. What do you think about this case? Do you believe the DNA evidence alone was enough to convict Coley McCraney? Or do you think there are still pieces of the puzzle missing? Share your thoughts in the comments or connect with us on social media. Let's keep the conversation going. Thank you for joining me for this emotional journey on True Crime Revealed. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of resilience, tragedy, and justice. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and hold your loved ones close.